Thank you very much for waiting. We would now like to begin the press conference after the fourth round of meeting of NAIC. Chairman Kurokawa will be giving the press conference. At the very outset, based upon the substance of the fourth round of NAIC meeting, may I ask him to give us some comments and impression, then open the floor for question and answers. It is 5:15. We would like to have the press conference for half an hour or so. So Dr. Kurokawa, please. Thank you very much for your attendance. And as you have already seen, we have had Chairman Madarame of the Nuclear Safety Commission, as well as the former the President of the NISA, Mr. Terasaka, were called as witnesses. We were given detailed explanation. To be frank with you, I believe today's hearings were extremely informative for our investigation for NAIC. Based upon the hearing today, there were couple or so of points important for our investigation going forward. First point, the Chairman Madarame of the Nuclear Safety Commission have actually made an apology. He has admitted that there were defects on the safety guidelines. The guidelines on the siting review established in 1964, he has admitted that there were defects. And further, in the accident this time, there were indeed a significant amount of radiation being released, exceeding the level which was expected and assumed in the system. So there has been fundamental problem to do with the safety of the nuclear power plants, which was also stated by Dr. Madarame. And also, based upon the guideline, the siting of the nuclear power plant was actually done in a place which was not supposed to be allowed to do so. That there may have been due to the reasons at the time, but according to the US guidelines, the location in Japan was never ever have been allowed. So they may have forced through on the siting of the nuclear power plants where they were supposed not to build in our archipelago, which is ridden with earthquakes. So as Dr. Madarame has said, we may have to seize a wholesale review on the guidelines. Another point is the organization. The organization which drafts the guideline and the organization to implement the guideline, which is the NISA, that they have to have the mission that they were to be responsible for the safety of the nuclear energy, but they were not prepared at all for emergency. Now, they did not have this realistic understanding that there was a fundamental problem to do with their awareness, that they did not have enough passion and preparedness to protect the people. Now, the third point is the lack of expertise as an organization. And as the former head of the NISA himself said, they did not have the expertise, so they were not able to respond properly in the case of emergency. And now, what is being deliberated at the Diet? We need to have highly independent organization which can come up with recommendation proposals based upon science. Once again, we were able to come to be aware of the necessity and importance of such organization, which may have actually led to the incident and accident. We need to create the safety standards which will be recognized internationally. We have the responsibility to establish such standards. Japan should be ashamed that we were often commended to be the country of the high technology. Now, as the world is watching us closely, how can Japan be able to re-establish ourselves to think about the guidelines and the standards, whether we have standards which could be recognized widely internationally or not? Even if the guidelines are written in Japanese, it could be understood readily. Thank you, Dr. Kurokawa. Now we would like to open the floor for questions. As I have mentioned earlier, since the NAIC meeting itself have been extended, so we would like to have press conference for half an hour or so, and if I could ask you to refrain from any doorstep interviews. Now for the questions. Please identify yourself and, as much as possible, use the microphone to ask your question. Any question, please? From Shukan Kinyobi, the weekly. And thank you. On the second point, that the disaster preparedness was inadequate. Mr. Terasaka, the former head of the NISA, who was actually the Secretary General at the government's nuclear disaster preparedness headquarters, how did he respond? He thought that to have a secretariat established as a NISA, he has misunderstood to be just locating the secretariat here. He did not have good communication with the Prime Minister's office, just several telephone communications. So what is your impression having been given such explanation?
Well, the Director General made that decision on that timing. So my understanding is that in terms of the expertise, it's not necessarily so. The organization structure was not such. And concerning his own judgment, what is the responsibility? Those are the things that I would like to ask. Now, about the delay in the speedy information publication, many possible causes have been discussed. In other words, various pieces of information are collected and then submitted to the Prime Minister's office. Then there needs to be an organization that this piece of information is very important, and then conveying that to the Prime Minister's office. That must be the work of the Secretariat. Any comment? It's just as you have seen in that sense. I think what you have just mentioned has been recognized, and concerning the measures, emergency measures, it's the Secretariat, as the head of the Secretariat, make sure that those things shouldn't happen. Getting information is one of the major responsibilities, as I understand. Freelance journalist, my name is Nishinaka. It's about the emergency. And you talked about the emergency, but not just in the case of emergency, but there is the issue of the radiation exposure. Per year, it's 20 millisieverts. Lifting the exclusion zone might be conducted based on that 20 millisieverts. And also the restart issue. The stress test was mentioned, but at the moment, the NSC can actually do the double checking. Can they fulfill the responsibility at the moment regarding the restart of the power plant? The safety guideline hasn't been even revised. Based on today's findings, are you planning to actually request the government to do certain things? And the minutes were not actually taken. But regarding the future measures, what kind of actions are you going to take? Concerning what I mentioned in the Q&A session, mass media is a tool to make sure that information is provided extensively to the people. And the explanation that was given before, there was a cabinet decision to establish a new regulatory authority. I'm not against that. That was decided by the executive branch, but in the national diet that comprises consists of representatives elected by the public in a public manner, exhaust discussions so that from the externals the community, from the world. We would like to make sure that there is a credible function, expertise, and management. That's the kind of organization we would like to see. And I think your questions with regard to the fact whether the public share that view. So it's really not my personal opinion. We need to have a process to support the function of the legislature. I think that's the principle of democracy, in my personal opinion. Sankei newspaper. About the hearings, about the witnesses. Mr. Khan, interviewing the former Prime Minister Khan, when will they be conducted, in what manner? I understand there are required procedures. I can't make a decision in a single-handed manner. Of course, it's being discussed. At what kind of timing, what kind of things should be asked? It's being discussed, so that will be conducted. It's not been decided how it will be conducted. It's possible that he will not be interviewed. We haven't decided that yet. Thank you. As Dr. Sakiyama mentioned, concerning the process of stress test evaluation, it's so old and it's conducted in such a manner that anybody who are against that opinion are eliminated. I think that opinion is right. The 80% of the members are promoting the nuclear, and the MC receives the money from the nuclear-related manufacturers. According to NAIIC, those 12 expert members receive money. Profit-making company. They give money, they provide money. Of course, they have certain kind of expectations in terms of their interests. So this is really like an investment money. And if it's held in the NISA, the commission, if the questions asked to Minister Edano, this will not do. Unless we change this kind of the background or the fundamental platform, even the regulatory authorities created, the same thing will happen. People are weak, soft about money. If you receive millions of money, of course, people will be lenient. As a NAIC, how you are going to address this? That's the people's opinion. Many people get the information from mass media concerning the stress test. It has been accepted or okayed, and many people are somewhat nervous about this. People have anxiety. And today we did this kind of a hearing interview, so perhaps the history and the background was clarified by a little background of the histories. But it's not really clear enough. It's difficult to say that with the stress test is okay. NISA will just say yes to what the electric power company says, and NSC says yes to what the NISA says. So to put in a nutshell, the nuclear safety policies, they just listen to what the electric power companies say. The NAIC, can't you actually address this problem or issue? Of course, we are studying this. And that's what we have in our mind to make sure that the people will know about this. Of course, our responsibility, our roles are very important.
Monthly magazine Facta. My name is Miyajima. Dr. Madarame, at the outset, said that he wasn't sleeping for 10 days or so. He doesn't have much recollection. And in today's 1-hour testimony, for 20 times or so, he mentioned something like he doesn't have the memory, he's not clear in his recollection. Human beings, if you try hard, you can remember what has happened. But in particular, Dr. Madarame is providing lots of advice to Prime Minister's office, including the fifth floor, the people. Or if you could ask the people who were given advice from Dr. Madarame, I'm sure you are able to obtain the relevant information. Going forward, at the NAIC's witness testimony meetings, I'm sure there will be many people who would say that they don't recollect, they don't remember. That would be problematic. So including how you would try to respond to such the situation. Perhaps you can call Dr. Madarame once again, or if you could ask the witness to provide the testimony in writing. How would you be making the truth clear? There was mention that you may be calling Prime Minister Khan, but how would you investigate the truth? Dr. Madarame is an academic, so I'm sure he has been very open and candid in his remarks. That he doesn't remember, it could happen. I'm not really sure to what extent Dr. Madarame was aware of what you have just mentioned. If I put myself in his shoes, those things could happen. In any case, notes or minutes would be very important. And as the former head of NISA had said so, we would like to, as much as possible, collect the records and the notes and tried to obtain such information. We have already requested as much as possible to collect the information. Of course, that there was no the earthquake. What have the NISA been doing? Now, the memory, especially the very important relevant parts that are missing. The top person, the chair of Nuclear Safety Commission, what is he thinking? What may be responsibility? I would like to know your reaction. What would you respond to that? My name is Hirose. In the hearing today, Chairman Madarame had mentioned that everything was done in a convoy method, that the licensees themselves did not make the necessary efforts to improve on the safety. The primary responsibility for safety regulation is on the part of the licensee. That was his understanding. But who should take on the responsibility for safety control of the nuclear power plants? Is it to be the government or is it to be the licensee? As at the NAIC, what is your position right now is my question. We don't have any position at all right now. What I have heard is that the guidelines and rules, as provided by NISA, how are they written, is what we have asked. And I'm sure you are aware of this. So if you compare those rules in Japan and the rules and regulation in other countries like UK or United States, and also something is missing, and that is also included in the recommendation coming from IAEA. And that is the reason why we have asked those questions to Mr. Terasaka. And Dr. Madarame has also insinuated something like that. We should not just leave everything to the manufacturers, the licensees. How to decide on the rules? And what I have just mentioned, the quoting Dr. Madarame's words, was that what is the position of and thoughts of the shareholders? We should perhaps include such perspective as the Japanese society as a whole. What is expecting? Are their expectations on the licensees and how the licensees are responding to this expectation? My name is Kamide. I'm a freelance journalist. I would like to know the stance and position of the NAIC. What kind of hearings would you be conducting going forward? I would refrain from making any specific comments. And that was something mentioned by Mr. Terasaka, that he would refrain from mentioning certain things. Perhaps there was something very difficult for him to disclose, perhaps. Now, the stress test on OE, nuclear power plants, and what to be decided by the Diet, everything would be connected. So the NAIC, of course, Fukushima nuclear power plants would be the central question, but you need to think about the wider interest and concern of the Japanese people in conducting your investigation and assessment. To what extent that may be possible, and how would you interpret that I would refrain from making certain statements by Mr. Terasaka? Would you conduct additional hearings? Now, I am fully aware of that, but the mandate is given from the legislature, from the Diet. So what we need to do is to thoroughly investigate upon the causes of the accident and how to deal with the damages from the radiation contamination. not only the information available through public hearings, those are not the only source of information. So the commissioners would have to actively be engaged in our own work. So in terms of our ultimate goal, perhaps we need to obtain all the relevant information and perhaps disclose at a later date eventually. In any case, a report to be provided to the Japanese people is because we have been mandated by the legislature and we will be submitting to the legislature who have been elected by the Japanese people. So we are doing our best. Kata from Fukushima Minyu Shimbun newspaper. So there have been hearings conducted for Dr. Madarame and Mr. Terasaka. The responsibility in their jobs is to provide the expertise in terms of knowledge as well as the safety regulation to try to protect the Japanese people. What was your impression in terms of their responsibility through the hearings? This is a personal impression, so I don't think I would be able to say anything. I would like to know what you have felt yourselves. From Asahi Shimbun, my name is Sekine. You have already made public your comments about the to be newly established, the new nuclear regulatory agency. It is to be launched on the 1st of April. And after your comments, as for the government, have they made any amends and so forth? If I could hear your position on the current situation. I hope that the Diet would have a very solid debate on this question. If everything goes as is today, I'm sure the Japanese people and all of you may have some doubts. And today's hearings, I wanted to ask on that very point. Rather than talking about the support committee and so forth, we need to think about the actual internal function of the new agency. In terms of international framework, we need to have a high level of transparency. Each people in their own position must have a high level of expertise so that they could take on the responsibility if necessary. And that is what we expect the new agency to have, including the regulations and rules. We need to rethink and review whether they are indeed up to their job in terms of international the levels. So in that sense, they do have certain powers and authorities, but perhaps sense of responsibility may be diluted in the Japanese society. That may be the problem.
I have two questions concerning what Dr. Madarame said. First, concerning speedy, it really didn't function, and one shouldn't really expect it to function. As for the justification, he mentioned that it takes 1 hour. Now, personally, I don't think that was convincing enough. How should we regard that? And he also mentioned that in the final analysis, it's about personnel, it's about people. And a response to that, please. As Dr. Madarame said at the outset, he said that there was a certain issue concerning the Japanese society structure or the organization structure. And that may be right. So what is your opinion? I think that was the part of the thing that was mentioned. I made a comment concerning the NISA or the rules and the regulations. rules, regulation, and then complying with the rules. And what about the responsibilities of the persons who are responsible in following those rules? For instance, IAEA says one thing, and then the regulatory, the agency or the authority has to describe certain things. But it's not written. Once it's written as such and such, then these agencies are conscious then because there will be responsibilities delineated for them. It's really no use making a comment on this, but I think it is related to Japanese society as a whole. It's difficult to make a forecast regarding what should be done. I think unless that Japanese people regard this as an issue for each individual person, it would be rather difficult to do anything about this. About the speedy function, it's really about why speedy was created in the first place. There was a lot of studying, and I think it was created because it was thought to be useful. But was there really such a function to make it available to people? Rather than saying they're trying to come up with the reasons why something cannot be done, I think it's important that to see how they are used. Kyoto Tsushin. About the NAIIC, the organization, there are those rules. When those rules were made, and there are 3 advisors, could you please address them? Your question is, why are we talking about this at this timing? No. What was decided at NAIC should be made public. So it's more like a reporting when something has been decided, but there are those processes, and processes should be made public. About the counselors or advisors, there is a process that, according to the rules, deliberation matters must be approved by the Diet. And this time-consuming process is, in a way, it just cannot be helped. The official, the decided matters were reported. Thank you. Perhaps 2 more questions because of the time restraint. Asahi Newspaper, Suzuki. As the chairman pointed out at this outset, it was an issue concerning a stress test about the restarting of the power plant. How do you look at that? The OE nuclear power plant is the case in the point. There is a demand for power. There's the government. Perhaps government wants to see the early restart of nuclear power plant. What is necessary for the restarting of nuclear power plant? Again, I'm just wondering how people will address this issue. In that context, a stress test has been done, so it's now okay, and that's how it's been reported. But the people are not very comfortable about this. So why do we find ourselves in such a situation? And that was discussed right in front of you. And I don't have any particular opinion on this. But retrospectively, conditions for siting, and there are many other related issues. I understand that. So what has been described by the National Diet is that what about the nuclear-related administration? Describe the future, discuss the future. But to look at future, we need to first go back to the history, and that's what I said at the National Diet. There is the examination guideline concerning the siting of nuclear reactor. Perhaps at that time it was all right. We didn't know about this, but I think that actually triggered for you to know more about this.
Next question. Yomiuri Shimbun. About the new nuclear regulatory agency, if I could ask a question. As for the government, will not wait for the assessment and report coming from the NAIC, and will go ahead and try to establish the new agency. And I would like to ask about this administrative organization. So would there be some subject to be discussed by NAIC as well? That from July, that new agency is to be established. What is your view on the organization, administrative organization? Because there are many things quite relevant, and that the NAIC should also make the certain recommendations. Since it is to be launched in July, do you have any direction that the agency should take? For the review of the organization, the government has asked us to make certain proposals. So I am thinking that perhaps I need to come up with certain statements. And since I have been asked by the legislature, my proposal or recommendation will be submitted to the legislature. And that is the reason why I have come up with the earlier comments. Thank you. The time is up. We would now like to end the press conference. The next NAIC, the meeting, is planned for the latter half of the February, and we would like to inform you through press release on our website. I hope that you would continue to take interest in the NAIC. Thank you very much.